Persuasive speech is about individual states not having access to the federal lands in their state and the resources they offer. The federal government owns 28% of 2.27 billion acres in the United States. Can you imagine the amount of natural resources on those lands and the benefits we could have if we had access to them? The ability for states to have access to these federal lands for use of the natural resource they offer is an ongoing debate. Even though there are opposers to this debate, the benefits to the states are far greater than the opposers think the consequences would be. If we could gain jobs from having access to these federal lands and the resources, think of who could benefit from them. Could it be a family member or a friend who may not necessarily have a job right now? We will explore what natural resources are on the federally owned lands, what they will offer the states if we have access to them, and why the opposers think we should not have control over these lands. Resources available could be things like oil, harvesting timber, hunting, fishing, grazing, recreation, and energy production. The amount of energy production is likely to increase if the states have control over the federal lands. Over the past 10 years, energy production on state and private lands has increased by 27%, and on federal lands, which contains most of the natural resources, is down by 15%. The money received from the energy resources will also go back into the state. The Institute of Energy Research says there is more than $150 trillion in mineral value locked up in these federal lands. They also estimate the Green River Formation in Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming contain 982 billion barrels of oil. The ability to extract this oil and other minerals would benefit the state. Supporters of this say granting states access to federally owned land and their natural resources will give them the ability to be more effectively to protect and harness the economic potential that is stored in water, land, minerals, and other natural resources within the state. The state will also have access to every federally owned land and resource except Indian reservations and lands used for military forts and installations. As population continues to grow in the states, it is imperative that the state should be allowed to manage its own land and benefit from the wealth of its resources. Cons would be not being able to build things like bridges or control floods that will benefit the state because of interference from the federal agencies. Supporters of this say federal agencies have mismanaged the lands they own and have blocked access to the natural resources. This has deprived states of jobs, revenue from businesses that are ready to develop those natural resources. There has also been catastrophic forest fires on those federal lands because of not being managed properly. There has been also a loss of wildlife habitat on the federal lands. Montana is an example of this because issues with the BLM and the Forest Service over fire management issues. There have been threats to the community watersheds on these federal lands, loss of jobs, roads have been closed, and citizens have been denied access to these federal lands. It has taken years to obtain mining permits. If the area is not closed for mining altogether, there has been a loss of money in states. In Arizona, for example, they are losing billions of dollars that would be used to better the state because of not having access to these natural resources in their state. Opponents' concerns, they think it will destroy the public land's heritage. They also think the states will sell the federal land to private investors. They think it is unconstitutional for states to own these federal lands and have access to the resources they offer. They also think it will give their freedom away for use of the lands for camping, fishing, hunting, wildlife viewing, and just enjoying the scenery. They also think it is an intent to gain control over federal public lands to get rid of federal land managing agencies and undermining protections provided by federal agencies that guide the public land management. Even though this is an ongoing debate and there are opposers to granting states access to federal lands and their resources, there are far more benefits that the state will gain than the ones the opposers think the states might do with those lands. Look at how much control the government has now over the states and even our own lives. Are we really benefiting from all the control they have, or are gaining? As individual states, we should be able to decide what we want to do with the lands in it. I think individual states know what is better for them and their lands than the government does, who controls many things to truly know about what happens to those lands in the individual states.